There comes a point in every day when the coffee runs out. The pot's empty, it's gone. And I always experience that as a loss because I love coffee. I love the smell of coffee. I love the taste. And when it's gone, I'm kind of sad. Now, of course, I can make more, and sometimes I do. And this is just a silly daily example that I'm using to highlight something. And that is that experiencing loss makes us sad. Actually, that's not quite the right way to put it. Experiencing loss leads to grief. Now, I don't go into a grief cycle every time the coffee runs out. I would have to be pretty fragile for that to happen. But the reason I don't go into grief is because when the coffee runs out, I can make more. So it's not a real loss. If you told me, though, this is the last pot of coffee in the world ever that will exist, and you just finished it, well, then I probably would go into a real grief cycle, because that would be a real loss. We experience losses of all different kinds. Material losses. You can probably remember back to your childhood when you lost something or broke something that was important to you. That was a material loss. But we also experience relationship loss. We experience the loss of a role that we had when, for example, we go from being a working person to a retired person. Or sometimes our hopes for the future are stamped out or canceled, and we realize we can't have the house we wanted, or the job we wanted, or the family that we wanted. And that's a loss of what could have been. And every loss is followed by grief. And grief is a complicated process. A minute ago, I used the term grief cycle, and that stems from psychology. Back in the 1960s, a Swiss psychiatrist introduced what are called the 5 stages of grief. She developed these out of her work with terminally ill patients. And the 5 stages of grief that she developed are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The 5 stages. But stages is kind of a misleading term or title, because this is a grief cycle. You can't march through stages 1 through 5 and then be free. Grief is a cycle. You go through it again and again. And the order might be all jumbled. Anger, depression, back to anger, to denial, to bargaining, to depression. And if you suppress or deny these feelings or stages, you make things much worse for you in the long run. Good grief means letting ourselves go through these stages and feeling the weight of them, and realizing there's no easy path out of them. Now, even acceptance, the 5th stage, that sounds really good, coming to acceptance. But even that is not as clean as it sounds. Because from a psychology perspective, acceptance does not mean saying, it's okay that this happened. That's not what it means. Acceptance means saying, this happened, and I'm going to be okay. What about from a biblical perspective? God gave us a wonderful gift in the Bible, which is the book of Psalms. And the Psalms are not all praise songs. A lot of them are laments. And they demonstrate for us what grief looks like. And if you scrutinize the Psalms, you will find denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. See, long before the Swiss psychiatrist Kubler-Ross offered the world the 5-stage model of grief, God gave his children models to follow for good grief in the Psalms. Psalms that bring us to the point of saying, this happened, and I'm going to be okay. because God is faithful even when I don't understand, even when I'm hurt, even when the world seems to be crumbling around me. This happened, but I'm going to be okay because I trust in God. Let's look at just one example from Psalms. Here are some verses from Psalm number 31. The psalmist writes, "I am in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and body with grief. My life is consumed by anguish, and my years with groaning. My strength fails because of my affliction, and my bones grow weak. I am the utter contempt of my neighbors. I am forgotten as though I were dead." These are words of a grief-stricken person. But what's important is that this person expresses them. And even more than that, that they express them to God. That's good grief. And in moving through this cycle, where does the psalm go? We know better than to think there's a quick and easy solution. But here's where the deep, painful, grieving cycle takes the psalm writer. "Praise be to the Lord, for he showed me the wonders of his love when I was a city under siege." That's a great image for grief. A city under siege. I'm living under siege. "In my alarm, I said, I am cut off from you. I am cut off from God." He's remembering his anger, his depression. "Yet," he writes, "you heard me cry for mercy when I called to you for help." And this psalmist is showing us good grief. He doesn't go straight to artificial praise. He goes through a cycle of honesty that leads him to genuine praise. And then he closes with an invitation. "Love the Lord, all his faithful people. The Lord preserves those who are true to him, but the proud he pays back in full. Be strong and take heart, all you who hope in the Lord." When these words come not from somebody who has everything going for them, but instead from someone who's going through pain and anguish and grief, these words have real power. And I hope they have some power for you this week. When you're going through grief, God gives you a grief partner in the Psalms. He takes us through the raw depths of our experience, anger, depression, all of it, and shows us what good grief looks like. Loss will come, grief will come. That's out of our hands. But it's not what's in our hands that matters. It's in whose hands we are. Have a good week. We will see you again later.